Hello and welcome to the podcast on North American literature hosted by the research group Studies in American Literature and Culture from the University of Granada. I'm your host, Christina, and today we're joined by Domaisa, a literature student from the University of Granada. She's here to discuss two powerful American novels, Wieland by Charles Brockden Brown and The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner, and how they depict what she calls the cannibalization of innocence. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Christina. I'm really excited to talk about how these two novels, despite being over a century apart, both explore how young and vulnerable characters are consumed, emotionally, psychologically, even symbolically, by the systems meant to protect them.
Let's start with a bit of background. What's going on in Wieland?
Wieland, which was published in 1798, is often considered the first American Gothic novel. It takes place in a supposedly peaceful family state that quickly descends into horror when Theodore Wieland, convinced he's receiving divine orders, murders his wife and children. What's terrifying is that Brown doesn't give us a clear supernatural explanation, and we're just left between divine command, madness, or manipulation by Carwin, a mysterious ventriloquist. Then Clara, Theodore's sister and the narrator of the story, is trying to make sense of all of this in a letter, but her account is marked by trauma, gaps, and emotional spirals. Her voice is unstable, and it becomes increasingly disoriented, especially during moments of fear or grief, and that reflects how her mind is deteriorating along with her family.
And what about Faulkner?
The Sound and the Fury, published in 1929, is a modernist response to decline, specifically the moral, racial, and familial collapse of the postbellum South. The novel is told in 4 sections, each section with a different narrator. 2 of the most important are Benji, who is intellectually disabled, and Quentin, who is emotionally unraveling. Faulkner uses stream of consciousness to immerse us in their fractured perspectives. Benji's section is disorienting because it collapses time completely. He remembers the past and present simultaneously without explanation, and then Quentin, on the other hand, is obsessed with time. He tries to control it but can't, and that obsession drives him towards suicide. Both of them represent innocence in different ways. Benji through emotional purity, and Quentin through moral idealism, and both are slowly and painfully destroyed by their family's decay.
So even though they're from different centuries, they both share some core themes.
Absolutely. What unites them is their exploration of how external systems, such as family, religion, social norms, invade the inner life and dismantle innocence from within. In both novels, we see young characters either suffering directly or witnessing suffering they cannot stop. Clara is caught between victimhood and witness. Benji is silenced by his disability. Quentin is crushed under the weight of ideals he can live up to. However, what's truly compelling is how the form of the novels reinforces this theme. Brown destabilizes reality through Clara's unreliable narration, while Faulkner takes it further by abandoning linearity altogether. These stylistic choices make us feel the characters' fragmentation firsthand. It's not just what happens to them, it's how their stories are told that reveals their trauma.
Now let's talk about psychological suffering. How do these authors show it?
In Wieland, psychological suffering is inseparable from the breakdown of reason. Theodore begins as a devoted brother and husband, but slowly becomes consumed by the idea that he's acting under divine authority. His transformation isn't depicted as a sudden madness because it's gradual, internal, and terrifying. He sees his actions as morally righteous, which is what makes them so disturbing. The real horror is that he believes he's doing God's will when he kills his children. Then Clara's suffering is equally intense. She begins as a clear, rational narrator, but over time her voice becomes emotional, repetitive, and unsteady. When she hears the mysterious voices or feels that someone has invaded her private space, her language breaks down. Her reactions, such as fainting, trembling, obsessively rereading Carwin's letter, reveal a mind pushed to the edge. Brown shows that trauma doesn't just silence people, it fractures how they think, speak, and remember. Then, in The Sound and the Fury, psychological suffering is also central. Benji doesn't speak conventionally, but his section shows us how deeply he feels loss, especially the loss of Katie. His memories of her are triggered by the smallest things, a smell, a word, and we're pulled into his world of repetition and confusion. His howling, often dismissed by his family, is a powerful form of mourning, but also an animalistic characteristic that is given to him. He can process time like others, so every loss is relived again and again. Then Quentin, on the other hand, suffers from an internalized obsession with purity and honor. His fragmented thoughts, which are repeated phrases and disjointed timelines, show a man who can't reconcile his ideas with the reality around him. He tries to control time, morality, and even his sister's choices, but all of it collapses. Then his suicide is portrayed not as a dramatic act, but as a slow psychological implosion.
You also focus on disability in your essay. How does that appear in these novels?
That's also incredibly important. So in Wieland, Theodore's madness is a form of mental disability, which is a condition that renders him incapable of distinguishing between religious revelation and hallucination. His logic is disabled by blind faith, and he becomes a tool of destruction. Clara, too, experiences a kind of temporary disability through trauma. She loses her capacity to reason clearly and is paralyzed by fear, especially in her encounters with Carwin. Both characters reveal how trauma and ideology can dismantle mental stability. Then, in Faulkner's novel, disability is front and center through Benji. He is infantilized, silenced, and even physically castrated. His family sees him as less than human, but Faulkner uses Benji to challenge that perception. His grief, his loyalty, and his sensory memory make him the emotional center of the novel. His disability isn't a lack, it's more of like a different kind of presence. There's also an intersectional layer too. Benji's treatment parallels the marginalization of black characters like Dilsey, the family's black servant, and both are seen as outside the family's power structure, yet both display more humanity and resilience than their racial conscience. Faulkner blurs the lines between race, class, and disability to critique how society defines who is fully human.
That connection is really powerful. Do both novels use narrative fragmentation as a way of showing trauma?
Yes, and I think this is where their innovation really shines. In Wieland, Brown uses the epistolary form and Clara's perspective to create a kind of psychological labyrinth. Her narration isn't reliable. It wavers between logic and emotion, memory and immediacy. She often returns to the same moments, trying to make sense of them, which mimics the obsessive nature of trauma. Then, in The Sound and the Fury, Faulkner radicalizes that even more. Benji's stream of consciousness is a complete rejection of chronological time. He lives in fragments. Events from 1898 blend with moments from 1928 without warning. Then Quentin's section is filled with hallucinations, flashbacks, and broken syntax, because his mind literally can hold it together. And even Jason's narrative, though more linear, is full of bitterness and projection. So in both novels, narrative fragmentation becomes a mirror of the character's internal fragmentation. We don't just read about trauma, we experience it structurally and emotionally.
So in both cases, trauma doesn't just affect the characters, it affects how the story is told.
Yes, exactly. These novels don't just describe the breakdown of innocence, they perform it. The way the story is told mirrors the way the characters are falling apart in a sense. For example, once violated doesn't vanish quietly, it shatters identity, time, language, and so on. I think that one of the most brilliant aspects of both novels is how this fragmentation also affects the reader's role. They force the reader to participate in meaning-making. So in Wieland, we're constantly asked to question Clara's reliability. We have to read between the lines to interpret what she can't say. And that lack of narrative clarity mirrors her own powerlessness. She doesn't know the full truth, and neither do we. Then in The Sound and the Fury, this goes even further because the reader becomes a detective. We have to piece together the family's history from broken, biased, or disabled perspectives. We never hear Katie's voice directly, only the projections and distortions of her brothers. So the reader has to reconstruct her story through fragments, omissions, and symbols. So, in a way, the novels make us feel what it's like to live with a fractured mind or to be surrounded by systems that consume and erase the most vulnerable. So, fragmentation isn't just like a stylistic quirk, it's more of like a reflection of the emotional and psychological devastation at the heart of each novel. And as I mentioned earlier, it's pretty much how the text processes pain.
Romai said that was such a rich and moving analysis. You've made these two complex novels come alive, and you've shown how relevant they still are in exploring trauma, disability, and identity. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I guess what really sticks with me is how both novels show that once innocence is gone, it's not something you just move on from. It changes people, it lingers. And I think that's why the stories feel so heavy even after you finish reading. It's not just about what happens, it's more about what's left behind. It's also how people carry that even if they don't fully understand it themselves. And I think that's what makes these novels feel so real, even in all their chaos. They don't try to neatly fix anything, they just show the aftermath, and somehow that stays with you.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much for sharing your research with us today. It was such a thoughtful, powerful discussion, and I'm really grateful you took the time to be here. The way you connected these two very different novels and explored such a deep emotional theme, I think a lot of people are going to see Wieland and The Sound and the Fury in a completely new light.
And thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
And thanks to everyone who has tuned in to Voices in American Literature. Until next time, keep reading and keep thinking.